This video is part of a 6-part video series on creating a landing page from scratch. So in case you haven't already, be sure to check out the other parts of the series as well. Thanks a lot for tuning in. I hope you will enjoy the following video.
And I think now we can directly move on to the next section, which would be, according to the wireframes, the types of holidays. The first thing we could do is we can duplicate our popular destinations headline, because I think it makes sense to use the headline 2 for all of the other sections in this layout. And we could start with a question: what's your favorite type of holiday here? And maybe even collapse this type here. After that, we could also add a sub-headline for this section. Of course, this is all just dummy text and we can fine-tune this later on, but I always prefer to not only use lorem ipsum dummy text, but also some text that might go into the direction of the later text, so that I get a better feeling of the project and the brand. Good. The next thing we can do is, in the wireframe there's a quite big spot for an image, so we could use maybe around 6 columns for the visual here. And we could also use another rectangle here for the icon that we use later on. And we could place these icons in a 3-column grid each. So here's one icon basically with a text, here's one icon here and here. And now we could add different types of activities. As for the font size, I would now maybe use the paragraph size, which was 16 if I recall it correctly, because we already have here a headline with 50 pixels in size, then a subheadline with 26 pixels in size. So in order to establish a proper typography hierarchy, I would go much smaller than 26 pixels here, and then even add a description of the activity in a smaller font size like 14 or 13, and maybe even with a lower typography, also to establish a difference between these two sizes again. Yeah, and we could actually duplicate these elements here. Perfect. And then we could think about these rectangles here. First of all, we use a lot of circular elements in our design, so I think it would make sense to add some rounded corners to these rectangles. Maybe 6 pixels, or I think 4 is even more subtle, that works well. And one could also ask why we are not using circles here in general, so why we are using rectangles instead. Because even though we use a lot of circular elements here in the header image, and also here for the slider controls, I think it's a good idea to not overdo it with the brand elements, in order to establish a certain sense of calmness, not use it in every section, but only once in a while. In terms of background color, we could also use our subtle color from before, and we could also establish a hover effect here. And for this hover effect, we could use the more prominent accent color. And the next thing we can do now is we can add some icons to these rectangles, and in order to save time, I already selected some icons from iconmonster.com. You can take a look at them yourself if you would like to, and we will place these icons inside the rectangles like this. And I think for the default elements we could use the primary accent color, and for the hover effect it might also make sense to change the color of the headline on hover, so that we have a bigger differentiation between the hover effect and the normal state. And I chose these icons for specific types of holidays. This icon would fit for a relaxation holiday, this one for a culture holiday, and this for a package holiday. Okay, great. And I think we're already going in the right direction here. The next thing we could do is adding another call to action here. Very similar concept to the slider section. The user could, with this button, open all types of holidays. Perfect. And I would also try to, spacing wise, see this as 3 elements. This would be one element, this would be one element, and then the button would be one element. So the spacing between these 3 elements should be the same, and inside these elements the spacing might be increasingly smaller. So that's the way how I approach these spacings as rough building blocks. I was researching here now a mouse icon that indicates the hover effect here. One idea that I had in mind while wireframing was that once you hover over one of these types of holidays, the image changes accordingly. So I think what we could do now is we could look for an image that represents the activity holiday. For this purpose, we can go back to the image research folder that I opened before already, and we can look through the images here. And I think this image with different people surfing and enjoying sports is quite a good fit for that purpose. So I will click on Command C and then Command V to paste it. And we will do the same thing as before. We use this rectangle as a mask, and we will scale this image inside this rectangle. We don't even have to establish the rule of thirds, but we can roughly imagine it if we want to. I would say this is something like a third of the image. I would say this is somewhat of a third of the image. It's very roughly, it doesn't have to be that precise. And this as well. So thinking about it this way, I think we could probably position this surfer on the focal point of the rule of thirds. And another thing that we could also do at this point is we could add some typography to make this look a bit more appealing to the user. And I thought about adding the name of the type into the image, so activity, making it a very bold and using a very bold and strong typography here. And for this specific purpose, I would also adjust the letter spacing between the elements a bit. Maybe we even have to break it down because the whole sentence doesn't fit. Yeah, I think it's already going in the right direction. Maybe we have to align it a little bit differently. Maybe we only start with 2 letters here in the beginning. Activity, maybe something like this. Reducing the spacing a bit so that it fits the size of the image. I will play around with this typography thing a bit more, and then I will be right back with the final design of the section. Now I made some more minor adjustments to the type of holiday section. Specifically, I changed the wording from activity to adventure, because on the one hand I like the wording adventure a bit more, and it was also a better fit for the visual image typography wise. And despite that, I adjusted some spacings between the different elements and adjusted the text in general a bit. In general, I'm quite happy with the result. I think it works quite well, and we can now move on to the next section. The next section is called Tour Packages. And what tour packages basically are, or what my idea was here, is that users who do not really want to select specific destinations themselves individually can directly access a predefined package of destinations for a specific type or from a specific country. It's, so to say, some sort of suggestions from the organization to the user. If we take a look at the grid, we can see that now we used a lot of 3 column elements here and here, and also here down for the icons. And we used the 6 column grid for the more prominent elements, such as the visual key image in the favorite type of holiday section, and for the active image in the slider element. So to change up the grid a bit and to add some more dynamic to the layout, I would suggest to use a different type of column number now, specifically a 4 column grid, so 3 elements. And looking at the width of 380 for 4 columns, I would go back to the initial idea of having a square format and adjusting also the height to the same value. And that's basically the foundation for our tour packages. And the next thing we're going to do is we will copy both the headline and the sub-headline of the last section. We can change the text to tour packages. We can add a quick description text. And the next thing we're going to do is we will add specific images that we will use as header images for our tour packages. I already did some research up front to save time here as well. All of these images are, as mentioned before, from unsplash.com, so you can definitely check these out. And I pasted these images now, and we will basically proceed the same way as we did before. We will create a mask out of these rectangles, then we will paste the image into these masks, and then we will adjust the image accordingly. What's important is at this point as well is if you select the rectangle itself and click on paste, the image will be placed into the rectangle as a fill element. And while that might be interesting for specific occasions or for textures, for example, we do not really want to have that in this case, because with a mask and the image aligned to it, we are a bit more flexible in terms of positioning. Okay, great. So now we added the 3 images, and the next thing we're going to do is we will add the description text of each package. For the headline of each package, I would suggest we use the subheadline as well, because in terms of hierarchy, I think it's somewhat on the same level as the subheadline of the section. The first one would be tour package number 1. And so on and so forth. And as a subheadline, I would probably use the paragraph text 16 pixels, also with a slightly saturated opacity. And if I would approach this project for an actual client, and if time would be something critical, then I would probably approach this a little bit different. I would probably start with the first element here, try to refine it as much as possible, and then duplicate it so that I don't have to make the same space adjustments and the same typography adjustments to 3 elements again and again. But for the purpose of this video, I decided to simplify the whole process a bit so that it's easier to follow along, and also that one can imagine the process a bit easier, and you can directly have a glance of the final layout during the process. Okay, so now we added the description text, and it looks quite decent already. One thing that I probably have to mention is that using text directly on an image is always a very tricky thing, or one has to be careful about it, because if you have the right type of images, it can work really, really well. But if you have people involved, for example, from the content management team, who are not really too much into graphic design and don't know which criteria are important when choosing a new image, these sort of layouts can quickly be destroyed by using images that are not really a good fit, and then the text is not really readable anymore. This would look like this, for example. And in order to make it a bit easier for the text to be read, we can add a gradient. So in order to do that, we can create a rectangle, and we will fill the rectangle with the light accent color that we defined earlier. And then we're going to place the rectangle into the group of the specific package behind the text. And once we did that, we changed the fill from solid to linear. And what we can see now is we have a gradient from our accent color with a opacity 100% to the same color with an opacity of 0%. And this gives us a smooth fade out, and we can even make this fade out a bit smoother by increasing the height of the element, like this. And if we want to make this adjustment a bit more subtle, we can also change the opacity of this rectangle from 100% to 90 or 80%. And this way the text is better to read, so the readability is increased, but you still don't change the overall feeling of the image. Another thing that came to my mind for these sort of tour packages is a gallery preview. So it would probably be cool to see some of the, or to indicate some of the content in this package up front on this page already. And in order to do that, we can create some bubbles here. And I'm going to duplicate them here. And we can paste several images into these bubbles. And for the last bubble, we won't add a specific image. Instead, we will fill it with our dark primary color. And afterwards, we will duplicate this circle. And we will change one of these circles to white. Decrease the size of the blue circle in order to achieve a similar look to the one we had in the slider controls in the first section. I'm talking about this one. We can create a new text element, and this number should basically visualize additional images that are part of this tour package. Now we can add a drop shadow again to the white background. And what I would also do at this point is I will select all of the elements. And once I selected all of them, I will click on K for the scale tool, press Alt, and I will scale it down so that it's not as prominent as the other elements. I'm also thinking about a slight stroke for the other images as well, so that we can differentiate them from the background image a bit better. And I would also adjust the stroke width of this one, and I can duplicate that. And now I'm already quite confident with this section, I would say. I think that we can add in addition a call to action. I am just duplicating the one from before by pressing Command and C and Command and V. I will add the same button that we added before here, and I will align this button with the baseline of this sub-headline. I rename the button to View All Tour Packages, and I will quickly align the spacing here. And since there's quite a lot of going on here in the big key visual and also here, I think it's not that bad that we step back a bit and reduce the complexity of elements in this section just a little bit. And then for the next section, we can maybe get a bit more creative with the brand elements. As with all the other sections, I also made some minor adjustments to the tour packages. I decreased the font size of the numbers here. I think they were a bit too big, and if you use smaller font sizes, in general, your brand can convey a sense of luxuriousness or some sort of elite feeling a bit better. And what I also did is I added some rounded corners to the elements similar to the last section, and I created a small hover effect. So once you hover over a specific tour package, the gallery elements are being hidden, and there's a text overlay similar to the style of the slider element with additional description about the Tor package, and you can then click on the element and you go directly to a dedicated landing page detailing all of the services inside this package.
This video is part of a 6-part video series on creating a landing page from scratch. So in case you haven't already, be sure to check out the other parts of the series as well. Thanks a lot for watching this video.